Welcome to a very special episode of Inside IALR, where we will discuss the 20th anniversary of 150 Slayton Avenue, or the 90,000 square foot main building of IALR's campus, with its designer and architect Larry Hasson of Dewberry. Not only is this topic and guest special, we will also have a different voice this week. My name is Daniel, and I'm usually behind the scenes with recording, editing, and publishing. Don't worry, Caleb is also here.
How's it going? Daniel, glad to have you on the mic.
Thank you, Larry, for your time. If you can just start with a little bit about yourself and your background.
My name is Larry Hasson. I've been at Dewberry 31 years now, all in the Danville office. I'm not from here originally. I grew up in Botetourt County, went to Virginia Tech, got my degree in architecture, and then moved here for a job. Really, wasn't sure I'd stay in Danville, but opportunities happen, and things kept really falling in place for me here. And, now that I've been here 31 years and been part of, architecture in the city of Danville for 31 years, I consider this home.
You went to Virginia Tech for architect, and what led you into moving here and staying in Danville?
So, by chance. When I graduated, it was 1993. It was a terrible market for architecture. I think out of my graduating class of 177, there was maybe 3 people that had jobs in the actual architecture field at the time. I actually stayed in Blacksburg for a year and was building houses with a local contractor, just to kind of keep myself moving and kind of getting in the construction field a little bit to kind of learn a little bit more. Answered this out of, an ad in the paper. That simple. And came down, interviewed. They offered me a job, and here we are. That's as simple as it gets.
So with the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research, the organization was formed around 2002. Where do you remember the initial pitch for the building, or what did the pitch needed to be for this site?
Wow. I've been thinking about that, and like I said, it was 20 years ago. But some of the memories there are just very visual. It was kind of this time where there wasn't a lot going on in Danville. The future of Piedmont had been formed. RIFA was starting to merge. The city and county had just started that relationship that they've had for the last 20 plus years. And I had done a building for Pittsylvania County and City of Danville, but it was the Business Development Center over at not Cane Creek? It's over at
it's in Ringgold, right?
Ringgold Industrial Park. Thank you. And so that was kind of my first taste of doing a project with both the city and the county's involvement. And then this thing came, and again, I say right time, right place. I'd been licensed probably 2-3 years. Less than 10 years experience, and basically we had some leadership change and some stuff at Dewberry, and it just put me in the right place at the right time. Not sure I was 100% qualified. I say that jokingly, but I'm not sure. I'd been working on projects that were maybe $1 million, $1.5 million. This was $15 million. It was a big step up. As far as that conversation. I went to meetings. I would listen to the future of the Piedmont and some of the premier leaders of that time, right? It was a pretty important group that was putting this together. And they had a really grand vision of what Danville was going to go from to. And I think at that period in time, I'm not sure a lot of people thought that would happen. I think we're seeing it now that it is. But they had a really good vision. And I just remember sitting in meetings with them, and they would talk about that vision. They didn't really ever talk about the building and what the building needed to be. They just talked about the vision. And so finally one day I went to an office of one of the gentlemen on that board, and it was my boss, it was the city manager, it was the county administrator, and this gentleman. And I remember sitting in there, and they said, okay, now we're going to talk about the building. And their instructions to me were this: we need 90,000 square feet, and you have $15 million. Go make us something that will transform the city of Danville. And that was my limit. That was my limit. And I remember walking out and looking at my boss, and I said, they just gave me kind of I don't want to say a blank check, but they just gave me an open-ended opportunity to do architecture, right? And a lot of our clients don't do that. And they were probably the first one I ever had as a client that said, "Hey, go show us a vision." Pretty cool. It was scary. I'm not gonna lie. It was a very scary time for me, but it was really cool to walk out there, 31 years old, and have that on your plate to say, "Okay, make this work."
Definitely sounds like almost like a sink or swim kind of scenario.
It was definitely sink or swim. And I tell you, I was on pins and needles for the entire time that project was under design. There was a lot of eyes looking. There was a lot of talk about it. It was a lot of enthusiasm. And I just remember my bosses going, you need to make this work. And we did. And it's not me. When we have a design team, it's 20, 30 professionals. We're working together. There was people with way more experience than I had on doing buildings. So it's not just me. I can't sit in there and say, "Hey, I did this." It was a collective effort.
Now, when you started designing the building, the 90,000 square foot as they gave you, was there consideration as far as at that time where the building was going to be placed on this particular land? And did the land itself have any kind of did it dictate what the building was going to end up?
Absolutely. So there was a couple things. At the same time we were doing this, we were actually doing the Cyber Park Road as well. So we were planning that, and obviously we had kind of set this site on the top of the hill, as high as we could get it. It was kind of funny because it was all overgrowth, right? It was like 5-foot sprigs of trees going through there, and it was a god-awful sight. But on both sides, and you can see one of them still today, they had these two sets of trees that were just humongous. And they just stood out. It was like one on each side of where the building is now, and they just stood out. And you could see them from 58, 29, and that was the only thing you could see here minus scrub. And so, one of the things immediately I was like, we need to salvage those trees. We need to try to protect those, and we need to build a building around the trees, right? And so we began laying the building out, and at the same time I had surveyors out here trying to locate the trees. And they finally located them, and when we finished laying out the footprint wouldn't fit in between the trees. So if you look at the building, and you always kind of see it's the sides of it aren't at 90 degrees off of each other. They're kind of tilted in at like 70, or I think it's 73 or something, some weird dimension. And the reason we did that was to keep pushing it forward so we could shrink the length of it so we could get it in between the trees. And if you look on the left-hand side, there's a pretty big retaining wall. Mm-hmm. That was a hard conversation to go have is, hey, I need to spend, $100,000 on a retaining wall because I want to save these 4 trees up here. So, so that played a lot into it. The other thing was really important to us was we kind of had this lighthouse on the hill type vibe. And we wanted to see it from 59 and 28. We wanted to make sure that the very first thing you saw was this entry, right? And so if you look at it, I was just looking at it outside as I came in here. We really shifted the whole building so that the 2 doors look directly at the intersection of 29 and 58. And what's funny now is our landscaping has grown too big, and it hides that vision, right? So I can't see 58 and 29 now because of the trees that have grown out there. But originally we had everything shifted, again, to meet that axis right there on 29 and 58. And that was purposeful. We wanted people, as they were driving either on the bypass or down 58, to look over to the side, whichever side you were coming, and see the building. Mm-hmm. And to this day, I still have people come in or out of town, and they'll come in and they'll go, "What is that building up on the hill?" If they come back at night, what is that thing that glows up on the hill? And that was all very intentional for us when we started design.
Yes, for sure. With especially with driving on 58, I'm sure at any time, especially with our glass front of the atrium, that the sun is a great, just shines right off that, and will definitely capture someone's attention driving by.
It does, absolutely.
Now, with the footprint of our building, is we have a main atrium with two wings that come off either side of the atrium, and those wings are 2 floors, 2 levels. With going back to the 9,000 square feet, how did you land on it being 2 levels and not 3 levels, or 1 level and it being a much larger footprint? How did the 2 levels in the atrium come about?
So, honestly, when you look at planning a building, what you try to figure out is how much space do I need? So we had 3 major areas, right? We had the research and development area, we had the advanced learning area, and then we had the community great hall area. And so those 3 spaces, we'd say we're going to allocate 30,000 square feet for this. We're going to allocate 40,000 for this. We're going to allocate 20,000 for this, right? So we go through that kind of programmatic stage like that. And then you sit there and try to figure out, okay, I can't fit 20,000 or 40, let's say 40,000. I can't fit 40,000 on 1 level, so it's got to go to 2. But I have to play that relationship to the other spaces because I need them to kind of work together and start to even out, right? So a lot of it becomes programmatic, and you can off shift, you can have different size floor levels or floor plates or whatever for different spaces. But on this one, we were trying to get as much as we could and as tight a space as we could. 90,000 was the limit. And so we needed as many spaces, as many classrooms as we could. So again, we tried to be as efficient as we could by stacking. And if you'd went 3 stories, it wouldn't have stacked as well. It would have been very squatty. I think it's got really good proportions as far as if you look at the elevations of it from the road even. It looks grander than 90,000 square feet, but it doesn't look out of proportion.
Now, with looking at the building from the front as well as looking at it from the top, the building is pretty much symmetrical. Was that also another factor too, was trying to get it a symmetrical building because of the atrium, or?
I don't know that was really an intention. I think what happened was, when you start out planning this thing, you kind of start what we call bubble diagrams. And you kind of say, okay, research and development, the center, the great hall, and classroom. And if you look at the shape of the building, we kept kind of playing with that and trying to go off of that and create a building. What we kept coming back to was that 4 little bubbles that we had drawn and how they were situated to each other. We go, that really functions well. Everything feeds off of the atrium. You have great access there. Everyone comes in there. You can use that atrium as a breakout space. You can use that atrium as a convention space if you needed to. So it was very important to have that big element in the middle, but everything feeds right off of it. So it's a very easy building to navigate. And so that kind of played into our role. And then, like I said, again, when we're trying to shove it between 2 sets of trees, all of those factors started playing into what that final shape would look like. Mm-hmm. The auditorium, for example, it's kind of this little offset or offshoot kind of pokes out the front. It's because we couldn't fit it within the tree plan, right?
Here, I thought all these were really, really cool design decisions. They're just trying to fit around
sometimes
some trees.
they are cool design decisions, but sometimes, they can be simple. And a lot of times the process will dictate kind of, your end product.
Was there any design inspiration or design cues that you looked at?
Well, I'm a big lover of glass. I think if you ask Stuart and some of the people in maintenance here, they hate me for 2 reasons: is glass and lights. So that's just a personal preference of mine. I don't know that we went and looked at some facilities, not so much for what they looked like from a architectural perspective, but more how they functioned. I will say we really wanted to make sure the function of this building was even better than the form of this building, right? And I think we got lucky because I think we did a good job with both. But for us, all along, it was, we've got to make this work. And again, when you don't have a program and they're saying we need as much as we can get in 90,000 square feet, what that tells me from an owner perspective is they're very concerned on how many spaces they can have and what they can do with those spaces, more so than even what the building looks like. Now, they did say it needs to be iconic. It needs to separate itself from the other buildings that are currently in this building, or in this city, excuse me. And I would argue at the time it did. I mean, but no, there wasn't any great, hey, I want to try to use this philosophy or this architect's kind of inspiring me or anything like that. I think it just kind of started to flow and fall into space or fall into place, excuse me. And then from there we just, you get into detailing and trying to design how each little space has its own little kind of nook and cranny, and probably where you start to get into individual space. And then you start to look at how each of those work, and it collectively starts to design itself in a way. Kind of go down a path, and you keep going down that path.
Were there any challenges during the initial grading of the land, construction, that would change the building?
I would say the project is like any project. It had issues, but there was none that were really catastrophic or deal killing. I mean, it really went as smooth as it could. The construction company that was building it was part of the future of Piedmont. Dewberry was part of the future of the Piedmont. So there was a good collective, hey, we've got to make this thing work. So everyone really came together and just said, we're going to do what we got to do. And we're going to work through the problems. We're not going to have any of this back and forth or whatever. We're just going to get this building done, and we're going to make sure, we do it in a timely and efficient manner. So I would argue probably one of the smoother projects. We hiccups here and hiccups there, but nothing that you don't face on every single project that you do.
How did the iconic facade or the atrium come to be? Like you mentioned earlier that it needed to be a beacon you wanted to see it from the road.
It's kind of funny, you made your logo now kind of look like a lighthouse, and it's kind of funny because that was kind of the vision, and then it's neat to see that transformed into that kind of logo, right? I think there we wanted to bring in natural light. We wanted to have that space, like I said, if you've got 500 people in the grand ballroom, we wanted to have that space as nice as it could be for people outside of the ballroom. We wanted to be able to hold events in that room. And then the other thing is we wanted to be, when you're sitting in that space, that you could see around you, all the conference rooms and everything. Those were designed, if you think about it, back in 2000, offices didn't have conference rooms with high technology in them, right? I mean, they were so expensive. TVs were $12,000, $15,000, $20,000. So people wouldn't build their own conference rooms. We actually designed those spaces so companies nearby could rent them and come out here and have really cutting edge conference room space and rent it out. Now granted, the future is everyone can build that for $10,000 or whatever the price is now. But back then, that was what it was. So that whole upper ring and that whole 2 rings, I guess, of the atrium was to be this kind of community gathering space and bring that community in and promote collaboration and having companies joint using space and stuff like that. So I think that's where it came about. Obviously, from a building standpoint, we wanted that to be the focal point. Again, talking about it, looking at it from 58, seeing it glow at night. I mean, there was no way that was going to be anything but glass at that point because it was high, 45 feet in the air, and it looks like, it looks like a lighthouse at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you're right. With our logo, if anyone looks at our logo, the Windows icon, as we refer it, that is based off of our atrium design. Mm-hmm. Now, with the choice of building materials, you've already mentioned your love of glass, but also the use of steel and then the red brick, the iconic red brick that we have.
That was the thing in 2000, right? Nah, I'm just kidding. I think some of the leaders, they were sensitive to Danville and that whole kind of downtown vibe and the red brick and what we couldn't do is we couldn't use regular sized tumbled red brick that sits on all these warehouses downtown, right? I mean, it just wouldn't fit this kind of contemporary feel. So, but at the same time, they really liked the softness and the warmness of the brick. And so we kind of made this plan as, okay, we'll try to use that, but we're going to use it in a more contemporary way. We oversized it. We made it flat-faced, just really squared up as opposed to rolled and tumbled. And it kind of served that purpose of kind of tying in the vibe of what, the city of Danville is, but it gave us a modern look to that, right? So, that was important. I will say the one thing, people always say the building is timeless. The one thing that was really not timeless is the striping. We call it salmon color brick. But honestly, that was, in 2000, striping of brick and patterning and stuff was a big thing. You notice if you look at the rest of the buildings we've done here, I've kind of gotten away from that as we've gone through the period. So that is probably the one thing that why people say this building sometimes is timeless. That piece was not timeless.
So even planning out and designing the building, just like choosing a paint color for a room, that, if you choose the wrong paint color, it could greatly affect how the room looks. You just mentioned those red bricks. You wanted it to look a little bit different. So even in the choice of bricks, if you would have chose different colored bricks, it would have made this building look different.
It would have, and I'm not sure. I back in those periods, I was dabbling a little bit in ground face block and white and blacks and different things like that. This building wouldn't have that same look if that had that on it. Honestly. So it was a good choice. It's a good mix. It goes well with the glass. Again, I think we were able to make a contemporary look with it. And you talked about steel a little bit. It's probably, we had so much steel exposed in the lobby, and we were trying to do some creative things with it, and we started poking holes in it and all these different things. And then we just said, you know what? Everywhere we have glass, let's just expose the steel. And if you look, some people don't ever notice this, but if you look at all the glass, you can see the steel behind it, and it's all got the circles in it. So we did that intentionally. So it kind of looks like this spine, and you see the kind of the structure of the building, which you don't see in a lot of buildings. So we intentionally did that in those areas, and it was to play off what we were doing in that lobby.
And I also noticed that in the atrium, if you look up, almost directly up when you walk in, that there's it looks like a series of steel beams that are crossed like an X.
And they had the circle going through it.
Yeah.
That was, again, you kind of wonder where things come from. Actually, what we had done there was we thought we were going to have a smoke evac system in there because of the heights and different things like that. And come to find out we didn't. But the circles were going to be the smoke evac system going through that and then branching out and kind of creating kind of this, I don't know what you want to call it, but this legs or arms coming off of this center piece. And so that's where that circle started from. And then once we started detailing it, we were like, man, that's just a really good detail. Mm-hmm. And once we realized we didn't need the smoke evac system, we just decided to keep it.
Oh.
And it is. When you walk in, it's eye-catching. You lift your head and you kind of follow it. And, it was funny. My structural engineer had a young guy, and he'd probably been there 5 months. And he spent probably the first 3 or 4 months of his time detailing that atrium. And he did drawings of every one of those trusses because they all get smaller as they go back, and they all have a very specific dimension. And so he detailed every one of those trusses all the way back, which was amazing to watch. And, just great. It was great detail, and it worked out well.
Definitely. Not only is the outside of the building, a work of art, but also inside of the atrium. You can either sit down in the lobby on the first floor, or we do have a second floor that has some chairs. And if you have some time just to sit there and just kind of look around, and you can see, it's almost like going to a museum and looking at a statue or a sculpture or a painting, and really analyzing, like, somebody really put a lot of thought into detail about this.
I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. No, and you're right. It was probably, I've kind of gotten into more of a managerial role now, and so I don't get to do as much drawing as I did back then. I can still concept and throw out ideas, but other people are drawing it now, right? And it was probably the last building that I physically just pretty much, was me and one other person did 90% of the architectural drawings. And so for me, I would sit at home, hours upon hours and just, like the stairs, detail every little thing down to the, the treads and the, other pieces to it, like the railings and risers and stuff. If you look at it, there's a lot of detail in there. And so I enjoyed that. I kind of miss that in my day and age now of other things I have to do, but that was the one where actually in that lobby, we spent a lot of time. And if you look at it closely, there's a lot of lighting in there that you will never recognize. It's kind of tucked behind columns, or it's up in the ceiling, kind of washing columns or whatever. And at night, it's just a very comforting space. Mm-hmm. And I've had people tell me it's a very hard space. It's very, it's cold. The materials in it are just too hard. But to me, I think when you look at it at night and you see it and it's working, and it's set up in the way it's supposed to be set up, I think it's a very warm space with very cold materials. How about that?
Now, not only we talked about the glass and the steel and the brick, but there's also a couple other materials that you will certainly notice on the outside, like the I don't know if it's a flagstone or kind of slate wall right there where the auditorium is, and then we have looks like some copper roof elements.
So the copper roof is pretty standard here. It's not traditional copper. It's the new metal seam copper that's just painted that color. So it's going to stay that color forever. Those panels on the front of the atrium, or on the auditorium, excuse me. One of our architects I was working with, he found this product, and it came from Italy. And it's beautiful. We kind of did that shift where we put them at, 45 degrees instead of stacking them up. And it was a great detail, but they had to ship them from Italy, and that probably wasn't the cheapest material to go out there. But again, I think it makes when you come up that drive and you see that, it makes a pretty good statement. And I noticed they've now kind of uplit it with some lights. Mm-hmm. And I think at night it's really pretty attractive now.
Yes. Well, it also adds a great contrast to the brick itself.
It does.
And I know over the years we have certainly our campus, not only our campus but our main building. We've the landscaping has changed, and I know right there in front of the auditorium, I think there was some trees there at one point, and we have removed those and included the uplights for that.
I was kind of torn between that. I like the trees there because as you walk down from the upper parking lot and you come across that sidewalk, it becomes a very intimate experience walking across there. But at the same time, you're right. The trees had grown to the point where you were losing the aspect of that wall. And to me, now looking at it, I think that probably was a good decision, even though I really liked the trees there. It probably was a good decision because it has exposed that and made that more visual from the road and from your entry into the building itself.
Yeah, that pathway you're talking about, where the trees were right there at the auditorium. You kind of, especially this time of the year, fall going into winter, where it gets dark a little bit earlier. People walking out that way to go to the upper parking lot. It does kind of have that little bit of a college campus feel with that walkway and the stairs going up to the upper parking lot. But yeah, the trees.
You have to thank the trees for that.
But yeah, with the removal of the trees, it certainly does showcase, another element of our building right there with that particular kind of stone material. So when the building was completed and they had the ribbon cutting ceremony, what was everybody's reactions or impressions with the building? Because I'm sure that when it was being built, you had the people who were involved from the they were getting updates, they were doing walkthroughs, but as far as the local people, being able to come and see it for the first time, like, okay, we've been seeing this building being constructed for the last X number of months or year and a half, 2 years, and when they finally see it, what is their reaction?
So the interesting piece of that was, like I said, we were doing the Cyber Road at the same time, or Cyber Park Road, and so really getting close to the building wasn't even an option. So if you think about it, people were seeing it while it was being constructed from 2958, right? That's about as close as you could get to that building at that time because everything else was under construction. I guess you could go down that side road, but you, what is it? It's the front road right there. It comes off of 29. I can't remember the name of it.
River Point?
Yeah. But at the same time, you can't really look up that hill and gauge the size of the building. So what I'd say is probably a lot of people's reaction is they had no idea the scale of it and the, how big it was inside and the things that were happening there because, when you look at it from 2958, it's not as imposing as it is as when you drive up on it. And so I think in general, people's reaction was obviously positive. And I remember there was events and everything held, and there was a lot of excitement. There's probably a lot of people didn't know exactly, what its mission was, why we were spending money to do it, and what the end product of it was going to be. But I think the people that did appreciated it, and they probably saw it as, hey, this was a good. I mean, we had this vision, and it looks like we've met that, right? It's funny because I have a ton of people. I think you talked about it a little bit. Is I've had a ton of people always telling me, man, I can't believe that building's that old or whatever, and people that really love it. But I've also had people just tell me I hate that building, and I mean, you have to have thick skin as an architect. I'm not gonna lie.
Is that hate in a good way or hate in a bad way?
The thing about architecture is it's people get to use their own judgment on it, right? I mean, some people will like what you do and some people won't. And that's what I say. You got to have thick skin because if you're doing this to try to get everyone to like what you're doing, you're going to have a short shelf life as an architect. I kind of like people to disagree about it at times. I wouldn't want everyone to say, hey, this is the best building I've ever seen in my life. You want some people to be negative or have some critical points. I mean, how do you learn or how do you get better as an architect if you don't hear what people are concerned about or what they don't like? So, I mean, I kind of take that as, you drive down the road every day going to work, right? You pass 100 buildings. You probably don't even know out of 95 of them what material they're made out of, what they look like, how you even go in the front door. You're not paying attention to that, right? You're just kind of going about your business. I would argue when you pass this building, whether you like it or you hate it, you talk about it. And to me, that's a win. Mm-hmm. To me, it's a win that at least it's gotten you to the point where you've got an opinion about it. You walk inside of it, you got an opinion. You may not like it. You may not like one detail about it. And you may be absolutely right. I go through and critique my buildings after they're done all the time. And I can tell you 20 things I hate about this one. And I've also heard from people here 20 things that they probably don't like. And none of them are ever going to be perfect. But they are good. I mean, that's a good growing opportunity. Mm-hmm. And that's how, I always tell people, that the next building I do should be better than the last one.
Right. Exactly. Now, we just talked about people's reactions when they were able to first see the building after it was completed. So I guess at the time of construction, Slayton Avenue wasn't a through street?
No. So I think, Now you're asking me things from 20 years ago. They were both going on simultaneously. So Slayton and the Institute were being built at the exact same time. It's the road right down at the bottom of Slayton here that was there. But again, when you're on that road, and you could go around the backside over towards the airport. But again, from any of those angles, you had no sense of what was going on there because it kind of, from that angle, when you first turn on the Cyberpark, you can't even see the building.
When you drive up Slayton Avenue and you turn, you pass our gateway sign and you turn right into our entrance, and there is a little bit of like a hill. You're already going up a hill, and then you turn right into our driveway, and you still got a little hill to go up, and you see our building. It's almost like in certain TV shows or movies where someone has to drive up to like an old castle or something, where it's like, it's a big structure, and it's like it's even bigger because it's on a hill.
Yeah.
Where if you would think probably a lot of these type of buildings would normally be on level ground somewhere. You wouldn't be driving uphill to arrive to it.
It was a challenging site. I mean, if you look at it, again, we wanted to get it as high as we possibly could so that it was the focal point of the park, not just when it was built, but for every other development that comes through here, right? So we wanted it to stand out. But the more we lifted the building out of the ground, the harder it became to set it on the ground. And so, there's a happy medium there. Same thing with the new building we're doing over at ATDM. I mean, walls. And all those walls are partly because we're trying to get it out of the ground as far as we can. And we're having to just make that balance of what that final level is that gives us the best bang for our buck, right? We get to see it, but at the same time, we're not building 40-foot high walls.
Carrying the design theme from the main building to other parts of our campus, what are some of those elements that have been carried on?
So, we have been, I guess Dewberry's been blessed. We're on our 5th building out here. I don't tell people this story, and I'm going to kind of answer your question in a second, but we lost the 2nd building. So
what even was the 2nd building?
Hawkins. So if you think about that, here we are. We just finished this, and it kind of relates back to the Institute, and it kind of relates to one of your questions you haven't asked me yet. But, what did I learn from that project? And what I learned is how to be humble, because, you do a project like this, and you have the success that it had. It was under budget. It was on time. It made the statement that everyone wanted it to make. Everyone was super happy about it, right? Within the next year, they go out for a new building in Hawkins, and we lose it. And, from my standpoint, it probably changed my mindset about architecture completely. It's almost like if I would have won that building, would my ego stayed in check, or would I, my head swelled to the size of, a huge pumpkin? I don't know. But, it was pretty humbling. It's a gut punch. You do everything right. You succeed in every level of a building that you can. And then the very next one you lose. And I say that because it kind of humbled me, but it also made me learn that, someone is always going to try to do something better than you. Someone is always going to have different ideas. And you got, from our profession, you got to get out of the architectural realm sometimes and listen to the client more and understand what other things are really weighing on their mind that's not building related. Sometimes we're architects, we stay in the architectural world and we want to stay there the whole time. But, that one we lost because we evidently didn't hear what the client's mission was on that building, or what he needed that building to do, or what besides architecture he was expecting. Lost it, moved on. 1 building, 3, 4, 5, and 6 now. So I say that, and I wanted to say that because, it's important to understand that, we've been out here for 20 years on this project with the campus. And beyond the architecture, it's also about being a good client manager and understanding and being friends and, everything else that's outside of the architectural realm. What can we do to help this mission, right? Now, to answer your question, sorry, I wanted to just say that because it was kind of a humbling experience for me. But, I think obviously the red brick is kind of morphed around. The mission has changed a little bit out here. The last 3 buildings have been solely geared towards the advanced manufacturing sector. And just that setup is a little bit different than this setup, right? So obviously we've had to change our architectural approach to kind of work in that realm. It's more of an industrial feel, but we can't put industrial buildings out here on this campus. They got to tie in. That's one thing I've been adamant about is we keep that flow of what the campus should look like. And when you get to 6 buildings, you're a campus. You're no longer 1 or 2 buildings. You're a campus. I mean, there's some colleges that probably don't have 6 buildings on them, right? So, keeping that consistency in materials, trying to introduce new materials, but ones that work well with the ones that we have, has been a challenge. I would say we are succeeding somewhat, and then I've seen a couple of areas where I'd like to have a do-over, So just trying to keep a consistency there, but not letting that dictate the function of the building. So, again, like I said, as the function has changed, our material palettes, our layouts, everything, probably less glass now, even though ATDM is going to have a lot of glass on it, on the building too. Just trying to adapt to what the program is.
If this project was pitched today in 2024,
okay,
how would the building be different if it was the exact same plot of land and everything, as far as the last 20 years, as far as maybe new design thoughts, materials, or how would the building potentially be different?
Well, one, the first thing, it'd be way more expensive. I'm not gonna lie. This building, I forget the square footage number. It's like $125 a square foot or something. Buildings now are $600-700. So and they're not nearly as ornate or have as much design in them as this, right? So this building would be super expensive, just as it is. I think I would hope in 20 years that I would be better at designing this building now than I was then. Maybe not. Maybe I, started strong and I'm kind of fizzling out at the end. But I feel like, I think, one, knowing what we know now, obviously some of the things we designed this building to do, we would change that programmatically, right? And that would probably in itself change that dynamic of what the building looked like. We always talk about flexibility, and everything we've done out here has been kind of speculative. So we've always had to have this measure of being able to change and make the building repurpose. I would argue this building has repurposed well over a 20-year period. Because there's spaces out here that weren't here when we started, and like I said, there's been a lot of shift and change in how this functions, and yet the building has been pretty adaptable, fairly economically and fairly easy. So I don't know. I'm not 100% sure that we would make that any better. We may make that worse now, as technology and all these things get more refined and we put more stuff in, it makes them less flexible. The least flexible building we have out here is the one that is Syntec, and it's because we try to design it for a specific purpose. Everyone else out here just adapts and changes based on what the need is. That one is a very hard one to do it to. I don't know. I think maybe at the end of the day, it would be somewhat similar. The concept here, I think, was strong. And people do, people still come in and say, wow, this building's 20 years old. And the fact that they say that means it hasn't lost its relevance. It doesn't. It means it still functions well, and it still reads well, and it's held up well. I will say that I have done renovations in here, which is scary that you're doing renovations to your own building. That means you've been at it a long time. And I think some of our renovations in here have enhanced it and made it better. I think if you ask me an area I was not overly happy with, it was Great Hall. It was perfect when you opened it all up and it's one big arena, right? And the scale of it felt pretty right. But when you closed it down to the 6 spaces, it was not good. I mean, critiquing my own building, it was not good. It didn't have great acoustics. You felt like you were in a tunnel. And we did a renovation on it a couple of years ago, and I think we made a major improvement in there. And it was simple. We did better acoustics on the wall. We dropped, a new series of lights down and brought that scale from 28 feet down to 18. So your eye visually now is looking at 18 feet versus 28. And even though you've got that 10 extra foot of space above you, you don't recognize it. You don't feel it. And the other thing we did on that was we just darkened the paint color at that level. And so to kind of deafen out that, that space above. And that subtle change works great when it's one big space. It works even better now when you close those spaces in, because now those spaces feel more like a usable space and not this big, this big box that's 28 feet high. So we were able to do those things and renovations and make it better. Probably we would be able to make this overall building better in some ways like that, just in some of the things we would do differently.
We've been talking about the 20th anniversary of this building. I just asked you, how would if this building was built today, how or would it be any different? Certainly this building's going to be here for another 20 years. Do you think people will still be talking about it 20 years from now, which would be the 40th anniversary, in the same way as they're talking about it today and, even when it opened up? And, the main thing that people say is, we've discussed this, is how timeless the building is. As of this week, we had a meeting here, and there was a lady who was part of the meeting, and she made a statement saying, how long have you been open? And the answer was, well, we've been here for 20 years, and she thought that we had been here for 2 years.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, because I don't know if I agree that architecture is timeless. There's some buildings that just wear well in their surroundings, right? And they're good. I guess the question would be, what are its surrounding buildings in 20 years? And not maybe on this campus, but let's just say, Danville keeps this progressive growth that they're doing right now. And there's more of these type facilities in the town. So this one isn't quite as unusual as the rest of the facilities, and downtown becomes a little bit more modernized, like you'd see in a bigger city or something like that. Maybe that, if you see more of these types of facilities, maybe that helps drown out the fact that this one is still, that beacon on the hill. Maybe not. I don't know. I guess it's held up well. Like I said, you go and look at buildings that are 20 plus years old and you see problems with them. And like I said, we've had to do renovations here. So it's not like this one is magically, not aging. It's just that it's held up well. And I think the materials that we use allow themselves to do that. We didn't do anything that really doesn't have a good shelf life or a long life expectancy. But to say that it's going to have the same regards in 20 years, that's a stretch. It doesn't, like 70s style and, like furniture and stuff is coming back. So maybe, 40 years from now, this building is like, super iconic at that point or whatever. I don't know. It's a good question.
With our building being so iconic, it had to help that it was built on a hill outside of the downtown main trafficked areas. If this building was built, with more, not just modern, but just if it was built in a more crowded area, would this building have gotten lost? It would have stuck out because of the design, but I don't think it would be talked about as much as where it was strategically placed.
So now you got me wondering if I should start making the rest of the buildings uglier so that this one still stands out, right? Yeah, that's a very, very good question and very good point. I think if this was sitting somewhere else where there was 10, like I said, 10 other buildings that were kind of in the same mold and same period of construction and stuff, I think absolutely we benefit from the fact that it was the first building. There was nothing out here. So it was really the first building that you could see once you got past the 5829 bypass. There was really not much past this, right? There was some industrial buildings and shopping malls or strip malls and stuff like that, but nothing building-wise past this really. So, that probably does help kind of portray that image. I think the fact that, I think we bring a lot of fresh faces out here that aren't from Danville. I know economic development and some of the other people, they bring their potential clients and people out here, and it, makes a good first impression. And if you're not from here and you see this, or if you've been in downtown Danville and you see this, it stands out. So I can see where people come up with that notion that, wow, this has been here for 20 years. That's crazy.
Now, with the other buildings on our campus, we talked about continuing design themes and relating them to, having a cohesive look. But you also want those other buildings to have their own kind of identity and not really compete with the main building.
Absolutely.
It seems like the other buildings that have come after the main building, Rapid Launch, the CMA, those buildings seem to have more of a boxy kind of angular appeal to them, whereas this building is, we have a combination of organic shapes as in the atrium, but also the geometric, wings that come off of it.
Right. And like I said, I'll go back to some of that is programmatic. Obviously CMA, ATDM, even Hawkins now, those require boxes. If you look at the back of ATDM, it's a big box. It's just, what can you do with the box to make it look better than the box? Now, what I will say, I think once you see the front piece of ATDM, I think the box feeling will go away. But, that part of that it's just a change in the programmatic structure of what we're doing right now. CMA, I think we tried to take what is primarily big box industrial space and add some elements to it to give it character and kind of fit it back into some of the campus. But again, you don't want every building to look the same. I would never put another circle on a building here. That's the iconic piece of this to me, is this big atrium and that 98-foot diameter circle. I would like to not see that anywhere, right? Those are the kind of things I think will separate this and we won't try to repeat. I think if you notice, for example, like even the red brick on ATDM, it's like 2 slithers. So again, that building didn't need it, but we wanted to make that tie to let everyone know that it was still part of campus, right?
Now, you just mentioned that there's the atrium is a 98-foot
diameter.
Why is it 98? Why is it not an even 100?
Short and skinny of that is probably I used all the 90,000 square feet in the other part, and that's all I had left. I don't know. I think once you start, again, it comes down to putting pieces together and how that functions. And then, like I said, we had 3 kind of boxes coming into that circle, right? So at the end of the day, I think, again, it could have been as simple as, hey, I needed 2 feet to get it between the trees. It could have been that the way it was connecting to the other 3 boxes, it kind of lended itself to be 98 feet. And for all I know, the 98 feet might be the diameter of the actual steel, and it may be 100 feet when you put the curtain wall on it.
Hearing about the whole process of the design and the placement of the building on this particular property. The beginning of it was because you were trying to fit it in between two organic trees. Yeah. But you're constructing a building that is of steel and glass and brick, but you're anchoring it between two trees.
Well, and I think the problem is if we didn't have that, what we were anchoring it between was two sea of parking lots, right? The upper parking lot and the lower parking lot, and it would have been fine. And now when you look at the maturity of the landscaping and stuff, you wouldn't even think about it. But think about it back then. I mean, you had 2-foot trees and little bushes, and this thing would have set up on a hill with nothing. I mean, nothing tying it down, nothing setting it on this site other than we set it right here. And it would have been very barren looking on both sides of it. And I just don't think that the look of it wouldn't have felt anchored, maybe is what I'm trying to say. It would have felt like we just shoved it up on the high part of the hill, and it was there. This kind of gave it a purpose, right? Now, one set of the trees is now gone. So on the lower parking lot, the trees died, and we tried to save them, but, it didn't work out. But when it was first built and before the maturity of everything else, it needed to have that anchor. It's hard to explain, but it just needed something to tie it from being in the middle of a field.
It's a great analogy for connecting the organic to the inorganic. I asked earlier about any kind of design inspirations that might have influenced this building outside of our area, our region. Have you seen other buildings in the last 20, 15, 10 years that now look like ours or have certain design cues from ours? Like, was this building almost ahead of its time? It certainly was ahead of the time for our area, but I'm talking about other parts of the state, different states or the country.
I'm sure if I really looked at it hard and close, there's probably some things that I would hope that there's some things that people come down here and say, hey, that was a really good idea. That was a good design decision. And maybe you don't want to go in and say, I'm going to do exactly that. But you, as an architect, you can kind of look at things and go, they really thought that out, and it was a really good process, and it probably works very well for the owner. And again, the next person could take, and it could be a different material, it could be a different way they do it, but it's still that kind of concept. So, I think there's probably some things here that I've probably seen some things that I don't know if they did them before us or after us or whatever, but you can see some similarities. And that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen another, like Atrium Circle that, hey, where did they get that from? And did that come from looking at our building type deal? But, there's a lot of architecture in the world, right? There's a lot of architecture that goes on. So, there's probably buildings that look very similar to this that by chance look like this. I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, to be honest with you.
Do you think in the last 20 years that we've had so many people come into this building for all kinds of purposes that there would have been a young future Larry who would have seen this building or attended an event in this building that would have looked around and said, "That's cool. I'm inspired," and they use that in their decision to go to architect school or to take a design and implement it somewhere else in their career later on.
I know I do that. My wife gets mad at me because I take more pictures of buildings than I take of us enjoying vacations or whatever. I'm sure that I do. I mean, when I look at buildings, I'm always looking around and looking up and looking at space. And, going, wow, that's a really just great detail, and I'm sure there's other architects that have been here. I'm sure they've said, well, I'm kind of bragging on myself, I guess, but I'm sure maybe there's one or two details that someone has said, hey, that's pretty cool. That works well. Did they go back and do it? Some variation of it or whatever. Like I said, for me, it's more I'll see something the way it functions and like the function of it. And I may love the materials. I may love everything about it, and I may say, okay, I'm going to use that material. But I may do it in a slightly different way, or I may say, I really liked what they did there, but I would have done it a little bit like this and made it my own. But it's still, that inspiration and that initial concept comes from something I've seen, right? And I think everyone probably does that subconsciously, because you're all, especially if you're trained in architecture, or even if you just have a design sense or want to be a designer. This beauty of architecture is, there's trained professionals that do it on a daily basis, but everyone's got a design sense, right? Everyone makes decisions on what colors they use, how their walls look, or what kind of room space they're going to make. Everyone has that kind of thought. If you're designing your own house, or if you're buying a house, you're making those kind of design decisions, right? So everyone's got that, and architects may be a little bit different because they're trained in it, and they probably see things just a little bit differently. But what I'd say there is everyone subconsciously is probably making design decisions based on things that they see. And then I think, you take those back and you start to see how you can integrate them into the program. And what I'd say there is you never want to lose sight of the program and what the final function and the programmatic needs are. I will not sacrifice a programmatic need to do good architecture or iconic, architecture. I'm always going to go and do form and function and all of that before I ever start to think of what that material is. Because, to me, at the end of the day, that's what your client is asking you to do, right? They're asking you to give them something that makes their job easier, provides them with the space they need, and gives them functionality.
Larry, I certainly want to thank you for your time and all the information that you provided. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on, or is there anything that you learned or that you took away from this particular project? I know you spoke earlier about having a humbling experience, but also having to be thick-skinned. But is there anything else that you learned about this?
I'd probably enhance that a little bit to say, like I said, I think the one thing we've done well here is we've been more than a consultant, right? And we're proud of that. This is our community. We want to be part of it. We're a big firm, but we're still a community-based practice is the way we look at it. And so we take our community very seriously. And we know that the successes here help us be successful. So, I think for me, it's been a personal experience of being able to work with a client for 20 years. Telly's the fifth leader of this group that I've been a part of, if you think about that. I've watched people retire from here now. It's kind of crazy. So this has been a big part of my life. And architects a lot of times don't get that opportunity to kind of meld or be part of something from the ground up. And, so I've always been 100% thankful that, I've been given that opportunity. And like I said, Gut Punch got me back into reality, and we've been a part of this campus and its growth and everything since. And so we're very appreciative of that. I'm appreciative of y'all having me here and actually putting me on a podcast. So this is what makes being an architect fun. Projects like this, clients like this, being this involved in the community with these types of projects, all of those things, that makes me want to get up and come to work every day.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Megabytes, IALR's on-site cafe, features everyday favorites, convenient ordering options, and an eager staff ready to welcome and serve you. Our enticing menus offer something for everyone, from a fresh, well-stocked salad bar, wraps, sandwiches, and our rotating hot buffet offered on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Megabytes is open Monday through Friday from 9:15 a.m. until 1:30 p.m. To view menus and for more information, visit ilr.org/megabytes.